early summer of 1775, long before the United States existed as an independent nation, tension surrounded the city of Boston. British forces controlled the area, enforcing the rule of the British Crown, while resistance among the American colonies continued to grow. Ordinary men, farmers, laborers, merchants, and craftsmen, were slowly transforming into fighters, not because they were trained soldiers, but because they believed their freedom was being taken from them. On a small rise overlooking Boston Harbor, known as Breed's Hill near Bunker Hill, colonial forces worked silently through the night. Using basic tools and sheer determination, they built defensive earthworks under the cover of darkness. They knew that once daylight arrived, the British Army would respond with overwhelming force. The men on the hill were poorly supplied, lacked formal training, and had dangerously limited ammunition, yet they chose to stay. Leaving would have meant surrendering their cause without a fight. At sunrise, British commanders were stunned to see fortified positions where none had existed the day before. Warships in the harbor opened fire, sending cannonballs crashing into the hillside. Smoke and dust filled the air, but the colonial fighters refused to abandon their positions. Soon, British infantry began their advance, marching uphill in tight formations, their red uniforms standing out clearly against the green landscape. The contrast was striking. On one side stood the most powerful military force in the world, and on the other, determined civilians defending an uncertain future. The colonial commanders understood their situation. Ammunition was scarce, and every bullet mattered. A strict order moved quietly through the ranks: do not fire until the enemy is close. As British soldiers climbed the hill, drums beating steadily, the defenders waited in silence. Fear was present, hands trembled, hearts pounded, but discipline held. When the British finally came within range, the order was given, and a sudden, devastating volley erupted from the earthworks. The first British assault collapsed under the unexpected intensity of the fire. Soldiers fell, officers shouted commands, and the surviving troops retreated downhill. A second assault followed, just as determined and just as costly. Once again, the colonial fighters held their ground, firing carefully and conserving every round. Confidence began to spread among them, not because victory was near, but because they had proven they could stand against trained professionals. By the third assault, the colonial forces were nearly out of ammunition. When British troops finally overran the defenses, the fighting became brutal and close. Bayonets clashed with rifle stocks, and the struggle turned hand to hand. Eventually, the colonists were forced to withdraw, leaving the hill in British hands. On paper, it was a British victory, but the cost of that victory was enormous. More than 1,000 British soldiers were killed or wounded. The colonial losses were heavy as well, but the psychological impact of the battle was far more important than the ground itself. The colonists had faced the British Army and inflicted serious damage. They had proven that courage, determination, and belief could challenge even the strongest empire. As news of the battle spread through the colonies, people focused less on who held the hill and more on what had been proven. The Battle of Bunker Hill became a powerful symbol of resistance and sacrifice. It showed that freedom was not granted by strength alone, but earned by those willing to stand firm even when defeat seemed inevitable. From that moment forward, the American Revolution was no longer just an idea, it was a fight that could be won.